Hi everyone, I'm Katherine and welcome to my channel. This video is going to be pretty exciting. It's going to be my very first time making a circle skirt and my first time making a skirt with a historically inspired skirt placket. So I'm going to be learning right along with you guys as we work through this project. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of how I made the pattern and how I made the skirt, I'd like to talk a little about the fabric company that kindly supplied me with the fabric for this project. The fabric company is called Modes4U. They sell a lot of Japanese fabric. They're based in Hong Kong, and upon looking through their website, they actually have a lot of potential for sewers like you and me. So not only do they have a huge selection, including tons and tons of natural fibers, but they have beautiful organics, solid prints, simple basic prints that could be used for a historical project, as well as more modern prints. Now, you might be wondering why a historical sewing channel would be talking about modern prints. But the reason I love modern prints for history bounding specifically is that it provides a way to instantly modernize a historical pattern. So let's say you want to make a corset or a jacket or a dress or a skirt from a historical pattern and you don't want to change the pattern at all, but you want it to be wearable in a modern wardrobe. All you would have to do really is just sew it using a more modern looking print, a bright, bold print, and it instantly takes it from the historical and makes it applicable to a modern day wardrobe. They have a lot of beautiful solid colors, like the beautiful burnt orange cotton poplin that I used for this skirt, that you can just take a timeless piece like a circle skirt and make it, and you can instantly wear it in a modern day wardrobe. So yeah, they have a huge selection, great customer service, and the shipping's affordable, the prices are affordable, and I really recommend them. So let's jump into making the circle skirt. First, I'm going to talk about how I created the pattern for this skirt. As a first-time circle skirt maker, this was probably the most intimidating part of the whole project, and it was one of the reasons why I had put off making a circle skirt for so long. I found a very helpful online calculator that helped me to make this circle skirt. It helps you come up with the overall radius and measurements that you need to create your pattern based on the specifications for what kind of skirt you would like. So in my case, I wanted a mid-length skirt. I wanted it to be a full circle skirt as opposed to a half circle or a quarter circle, and then you have to enter in your waist measurement. So in my case, my waist measurement is kind of up in the air at the moment. I'm a postpartum mama, my body's kind of changing. And so I went with the waist measurement of 27 inches, which is probably a little on the tight side for me at the moment, but I think in a few months it will be just fine. I do wear corsets most days, so there is that factor to consider whether or not you're going to be wearing this skirt over a corset or over your just natural waist. So when I entered in all of my specifications for the skirt I liked, they gave me a diagram of what my pattern should look like when it's laid out on a folded piece of fabric or a folded piece of pattern paper. They also gave me the radius for the inner circle, which would make up the waist opening. And of course, when I entered that I wanted a mid-length skirt, they gave me the length of, I think, about 24 inches. So that would be the length that I measure from the inner circle down to make the outer circle. Now, this website also had a very handy blog post about how to take a circle skirt pattern and split it into 8 gores. This method is very helpful if you only have the standard 45-inch wide fabric, which is really too narrow to fit a full circle skirt pattern onto. It's also a much more economical method of cutting a circle skirt and produces much less fabric wastage. So I created my pattern piece for basically 1/8 of the overall circle, like a pie slice of the overall circle. And then I folded my fabric into a rectangle made of 8 layers, and I laid out my paper pattern piece on top of that. I then traced it out with tailor's chalk, added a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance on the bottom, the sides, and the top, the waistline. And I cut it out. I had just enough fabric left to make a waistband and the skirt placket pieces. So for the waistband, I took my waist measurement of 27 inches. I added enough extra for the skirt placket, which was about another inch. And then I added also my seam allowances for either side. After I had my straight rectangle, I slashed and spread it just a little bit to create more of a very shallowly curved waistband, which I think goes nicely with a circle skirt. And then it was time to make my skirt placket. So as I mentioned, I've never made a skirt placket before, but I found a very helpful blog post on how to do it, which I will link in the description. I created my skirt placket to be about 12 inches long and about 1 inch wide. So I had to cut out a width of fabric that was 2 inches wide so it could be folded in half and have a double layer of fabric, as well as having enough for seam allowances. And then I cut those out. Finally, I cut out some bias strips of cotton muslin, which were 2 inches wide. This would later create my skirt facing for the hem of the skirt. Let's talk a little bit about a hem facing. A hem facing is very similar to a neckline facing in that it's a separate strip or piece of fabric that you attach to the inner side of your garment to finish off the edge, in this case, of your skirt hem. This is very, very important for a circle skirt specifically. Because the bottom of a circle skirt is so curved, I think it would be nearly impossible to do a standard rolled hem. So a facing comes in very handy for this. In addition to this, even on a very straight skirt hem, just like a rectangular skirt, a facing is still very helpful because it adds that stiffness and body to the hem of your skirt, which helps hold it outward and just gives it that flared shape that is so indicative of historical skirts. So now let's get into how I sewed the skirt. So the first steps that I did in sewing this skirt were attaching all those gores together. Now I don't have a serger and I prefer my vintage machine, which only does a straight stitch. So my favorite method for finishing seams like this is French seams. French seam is where you first sew the seam with the raw edges on the right side of the fabric. You trim it down and then you sew the seam again and enclose those raw edges in the second seam. Next, I added my skirt plackets to each side of the gores that would make up the side seam of the skirt. So one of the plackets was sticking outward and another placket was inward, so they would come together and be invisible when the skirt was closed. Now before I could sew up the bottom of this side seam, I first attached my hem facing to the whole hem of the skirt. Now, in order to make the waistband, I first pad stitched the extra pieces of fabric that I was using as interfacing to what would be the inner layer of the waistband. This just helps hold it in place for one thing and also helps create the curved shape that the waistband would later have. I'm by no means an expert pad stitcher. I've only really done it a few times before, so forgive me, it's pretty messy. Then I attached the outer piece of fabric for the waistband to the inner piece, which was now pad stitched, by putting right sides together and sewing around the 3 edges but leaving the bottom edge open. After this was done, I turned it right side out, pressed it all so it was nice and flat, and then I pressed under those open bottom edges to make attaching the waistband to the skirt easier. So in order to attach the waistband to the skirt, I first sewed by machine the outside part of the waistband to the front of the skirt. And my plan was to hand stitch down the inside of the waistband, but I didn't end up using this method for 2 reasons. Number 1, it was slower. But number 2, the most important reason was that my waistband ended up coming down a little lower on the inside. So in order to hand stitch it down, it created a lot of just like wrinkling and it sat very awkwardly. So I ended up just machine stitching it down from the outside of the waistband. So from the outside, it just looked like a top stitch along the bottom, but it was actually holding that waistband down on the inside. Then the last step was machine stitching the hem facing up against the skirt. So from the outside, it just looks like a very wide hem, but on the inside, that stitch is holding the hem facing up so it won't just flop down and be totally visible. And finally, I used sew on snap that I evenly spaced along the skirt placket, and I hand stitched these in place on the placket. So what do I think of this skirt? I love this skirt. I absolutely love the shape of a good circle skirt. It's really, really indicative to me of the 1950s. I also think it would go great over a petticoat. Unfortunately, at this time, my only really floofy petticoat is longer length, so I need to get a shorter one that would go under this, but it would go beautifully over a petticoat. But even without a petticoat, it has such natural flair and such natural twirliness. It's really beautiful, really flattering. It's such a timeless piece to have any wardrobe, really. And I can't wait to make some nice blouses to go with this skirt. And again, thanks to Modes4U for the stunning cotton poplin that I used for this project. I really recommend them. And if you're inspired to go check out their fabrics and buy something for one of your upcoming garment projects, then I have a code which will be in the description. It's Katherine Sewing. You can use this code to get 10% off your orders for the next 2.5 months or so. Definitely check out Modes4U. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, leave comments and questions below. Consider subscribing to my channel for more historically inspired sewing content and how-tos. Check out the accompanying blog post for more details of the making. And you'll want to sign up for my email list if you enjoy this kind of content for my weekly newsletter. And consider supporting me on Patreon. It really helps me out. And again, see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.